it is an opportunity for us to say thank you to all of you who have made this year a success for all that it has been a challenging year. We have moved forward in ways together that I would not even begin to be able to list out all the various people who have volunteered or donated or advocated or worked together to provide for housing stability and to respond to what has been a growing homelessness and housing crisis in our community. But I do want to say thank you to each and every one of you on this call, as well as many that are not able to join us today. I think it's fitting that this is the National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. It started in 1975. And as the holidays approach and people take some time to consider what we're thankful for and how we might want to pay that forward in many ways, we join with communities across the country to acknowledge Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. And I'm excited that the annual meeting falls during this week. We also think it's important to give ourselves an opportunity to begin what I think is going to be a very long process of analyzing what 2020 as a year has meant, the things that it has uncovered, some lessons that we've learned, ways we can move forward and be stronger together. Before we begin with what I think is going to be a really exciting conversation, I want to just highlight a few ways that we have seen an impact over the last year. The need for ARCH as a coalition on homelessness and housing has definitely expanded throughout the course of the year, and we've responded, you've responded as a collective, and I'm very grateful. The staff at ARCH has grown, the coalition has strengthened, we've pulled together new and innovative partners as we try to address the challenges that have presented themselves with COVID and with two hurricanes. One thing that I think COVID has made particularly clear for our community and across the nation is the importance of housing as a central and stabilizing factor in our lives. As such, ARCH launched Project Keystone with the idea that housing is sort of the keystone in all of our arches. It's the piece that holds the rest of the arch together. And in that launch, we've focused on two pieces of the puzzle. One has been homeless prevention, whereas we work to try to keep those who are in their housing already to stay in that housing. So that's the coalition partners that are pulling together to provide rent or mortgage or utility assistance. And then the secondary focus is on rapid rehousing. That's where we work with those who are already experiencing homelessness to make sure they have access to safe shelter, and then to support them in locating available housing that's affordable for them. And this is where the assistance with move-in costs and working with landlords comes in to reduce the time that a household is experiencing the trauma of homelessness. In addition, ARCH has started up a new program called the Share House, where we collect furniture and housewares and provide those items to households that are moving into reestablishing housing. We provide those items at no cost. I've mentioned a few times that we've seen a growing crisis of homelessness and housing, and so I want to put some numbers to that. Throughout Acadiana, since January 2020, we've seen an 82% increase in homelessness, while at the same time we've seen a 77% decrease in emergency shelter beds. There have been 728 people temporarily housed in local hotels and motels through the COVID program, and hundreds of households that have been sheltered in hotels for Laura and Delta. I do want to say that the hotel program has taken a tremendous amount of coordination and collaboration in order just to make sure that people had access to food. And so we had partners from the Hub and Cajun Compassion, as well as Second Harvest and United Way and Catholic Charities, who have assisted with making sure that all of those folks that are in the hotels had access to food on a regular basis. And so I'm extremely grateful for your support in that. Arch has worked really hard to transition 154 of those households into permanent housing, and through the Share House program has been able to provide 43 households with furniture and basic housewares. And there's still about 250 of those households in hotels today. So needless to say, I'm really proud of all of our accomplishments and our ability across the coalition to respond to changing circumstances and to face these challenges head on with a sense of courage and hopeful optimism. And I want to say again, thanks to everybody who has made that possible. Today's focus, our theme today is crisis to opportunity. What we're hoping to do is shine a light, begin a conversation around housing equity. And I want to open with some context to this conversation and be very explicit that today is just a beginning of what is going to be a deep dive into these equity issues, particularly as they relate to homelessness and housing for our community. The New York Times writer Isabel Wilkerson says, "America is an old house. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you're ignoring will never go away. And even though you didn't design or build the house or choose the foundations that are now cracking, you're still responsible." And I really liked that image as it relates to the housing space that we find ourselves in. The practice of housing segregation and racially motivated policy making was widespread in America long before the advent of the first public housing program in 1933. That's when the federal government began a series of policies that perpetuate isolated and segregated neighborhoods and substantial wealth and opportunity gaps that exist to this day. And while we personally did not create these policies, we are their heirs, and we have to understand what we've inherited. Racial segregation and discrimination against minority populations predated the specific process that we often refer to as redlining in the United States, that began with the National Housing Act of 1934 and the establishment of the Federal Housing Administration. But the implementation of this federal policy has accelerated the decay and isolation of minority inner city neighborhoods through the withholding of mortgage capital, making it difficult for neighborhoods to attract and retain families who are able to purchase homes. The process of redlining, as we know it, was a process of establishing on the map, residential security maps, levels of security for real estate investment. And on the maps, the newest areas, type A, were in green, and those were considered desirable for lending purposes. They were typically affluent suburbs on the outskirts of cities. Type B neighborhoods were in blue, still desirable. Older type C were labeled declining, those were yellow. And type D neighborhoods were outlined in red. Those were considered the most risky for mortgage support. These neighborhoods were the ones in the older districts, the center of cities, and often historically Black neighborhoods. An attempt to correct some of the damage that's been done by redlining was the Civil Rights Act of 1968, commonly known as the Fair Housing Act, which prohibited discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing, as it was based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. And though we have made some progress, many challenges to fair housing remain. There are still extreme racial disparities in home ownership and wealth. In 1968, the rate of white homeownership was 25% higher than the rate of Black homeownership. And now today, over 50 years later, the Black homeownership rate has not changed, while the rate of white homeownership has increased 5 percentage points. These homeownership disparities contribute to the shocking racial wealth gap in America. Today, housing is more unaffordable than ever. More than half of low-income American households now allocate over 50% of their income to housing. Meanwhile, housing stability is increasingly threatened by high rates of eviction and foreclosure, gentrification, natural disasters, and among other factors that are largely out of the control of the household, like COVID. The housing crisis has significant implications for the health and well-being of American households, especially those marginalized groups. The relationship between various aspects of housing and health outcomes, including physical health, mental health, chronic and infectious disease, maternal, infant, reproductive, sexual health, injury, it's clear. The racial disparity in incarceration rates has continually worsened. The rate for African Americans has tripled between 1968 and 2016, and it's more than 6 times the rate of white incarceration. Implications of criminalization are, of course, far-reaching. Criminal history can keep somebody from successfully passing background checks to secure housing and employment. And people exiting jail or prison often face significant problems accessing safe and affordable housing. Therefore, their rate of homelessness is high. In discussing housing equity, it's also important to recognize that more than 80% of women experiencing homelessness report some type of abuse or assault as the cause. And while women can become homeless because they're escaping a dangerous home environment, the fear of instability or financial abuse can also make them stay in dangerous situations. These issues are multi-layered, and obviously we're not going to solve them today, but we are responsible for this old house that we have inherited, and problems aren't going to go away by ignoring them. And so I am very excited to welcome today's panelists to a conversation about the ways in which housing equity and justice issues are presented within our community. So help me welcome today's panelists: Alton Thornton, the Director of Housing and Support Services at Acadiana Cares; Dr. Amy Fontenot, Federal Programs Manager and Homeless Education Liaison for Lafayette Parish School System; Tina Shelvin Bingham, Community Development Director at Lafayette Habitat for Humanity and Vice President of Macomb-Vise Neighborhood Coterie; Consuela Gaines, the Lafayette Chapter Organizer for VOTE, Voices of the Experienced; Billy Lacombe, Executive Director at Faith House; and Elsa Demetriadis, Chief Impact Strategist at Arch. I'm going to invite each of you to introduce yourselves, sharing your name and your organizational affiliation, and then also to share briefly about the ways in which the intersection of housing and those you serve or represent have been impacted by the events of this year. Maybe some way that your organization has had to pivot in order to help people access safe, decent, affordable housing in light of those events. And I'm going to call on Alton to start us off.
I was hoping to go third. Hi, my name is Alton Thornton. I'm with Acadiana Cares. I'm the Director of Housing here. How Acadiana Cares got involved in housing, I'm trying to make it short. When people start living longer from HIV, we realized that we needed to do something to get involved with housing people. So we started developing our own continuum of care here at Acadiana Cares. And so in a nutshell, if we have somebody come in our program, we can have them go through emergency housing all the way to permanent housing with the ultimate goal of being self-sufficient. During that, we also kind of switched our mission a little bit to help those who are vulnerable populations. So we not only do we help people who are HIV positive, but we help the disabled, substance abuse, and low-income families. The impact on this last year has been tremendous on the population that we serve. We've had to put, as with everybody, put a lot more money into hotel stays. Congregate living has gone down. We've done a little bit more to put people in their own places through different funding sources. We've had to change up protocols with staffing patterns, doing COVID tests. Not thinking that we would have to do that ever, but yeah, we're doing COVID tests. And through our clinic, for a while we saw a decrease in the number of people coming in for our prevention efforts, but that has also started to go back on the rise, because when people are quarantined with nothing else to do, I'll let y'all finish that statement. So we're doing more testing now. But as far as affordable housing and the programs that we have here, we've made some changes, but we're still striving forward to help all those that we can.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Dr. Fontenot, would you be willing to go next?
Good afternoon. I'm Amy Fontenot, Lafayette Parish School System, Homeless Department. Our primary concern, obviously, is the education of children. Unfortunately, the basic needs like housing and food get in the way of education. So we are always looking to partner with agencies, and that's what brought us to ARCH to begin with. We do not have housing to put families in. We rely on our contacts. And so we have a few churches that are our first resort, our first line of defense. And when they're not able to pay for hotel stays, things like that, then we lean on Lee and Catholic Charities and all of the friends out there that are able to help get our families off the street and get us into a little bit more stable so that we can focus on the educational piece. Ways that housing or lack of impact what we do. Well, obviously school stability is the first issue. And that's what that's really what I hang my hat on, is trying to keep a child stable in school. And when I say a child, I mean from daycare all the way until post-secondary, getting them into college. So we focus on school stability first and foremost. That's hard to do when you're moving from hotel to hotel. That's different school zones. That's out of zone bus transportation. That's schools on the outskirts that do not have city bus stops. So we're having to do cabs, and 5-year-old can't ride in a cab alone. So we're having to find an adult to get in the cab. There's so many things that go along with that, as you very well know. So that housing piece impacts everything that goes on with us in the educational world. Also, truancy is a big piece for us, because as a family is highly mobile, the students are not able to get to school every day, or they're late for school every day, or they're being picked up late every day. So then you get truancy involved, which then gets the court system involved, and that starts a whole nother issue because we can't utilize a school bus because we don't have a consistent place for the school bus to return or pick up a child. This year, obviously, with the impact, virtual learning and distance learning have become the thing that everybody's doing in education. Well, that's great for a family who has electronic devices and connectivity. But for the families that I serve and that all of us serve, that is not high on their list. They don't all have electronic devices or connectivity. And so when a school goes to 100% virtual or distance learning, my students are the ones most vulnerable at that time, trying to figure out getting devices pushed out to them, getting hotspots so they have wireless connectivity to get their lessons done. Well, when a family's in crisis, that's usually not the parent's primary concern of worry about submitting their child's assignments at the end of each day. They're worried about housing and food and electricity and warm jackets and all those kinds of things. And so that education piece gets pushed aside, at least when the kids are in school in the brick and mortar building. They are eating twice a day. They're guaranteed to eat breakfast and lunch. They're guaranteed to get the one-on-one educational piece that they need. Virtual learning is counterproductive to all of that. So those are some of the things that we have faced with that lack of housing piece for some of our families. And really our most vulnerable population out of my whole group is our special education students, because they were already at a disadvantage with education. They're needing so many more services that cannot be provided virtually. They need to be in a face-to-face situation, and that just can't happen right now for some of our students, especially those that have medical concerns in addition to academic deficiencies. So it has been a challenge trying to provide all of that. As you know, many of you have stepped up and housed several of my, most chronic families, trying to create some sort of stability so that the student can get to school every day, because that's the only way I can guarantee that they're eating at least twice a day. Getting eyes on them, because abuse is on the rise when they're all out sheltered inside of homes that we can't get eyes on them. So just all of that trickles, and it all, in my mind, comes back to stable housing. Because when they're on the run, because there's no place to go, it affects everything else, as you all know. So we are really struggling with trying to provide consistent education for all of our students, consistent food to all of our students, whether it's meals on the go or at the campus, as long as we're in a face-to-face situation. That connectivity with devices and making sure that they can get on when we do have to switch over to virtual. We have 2 schools under complete virtual right now, and that's going to come and go as things keep developing in the community with our high numbers, or with the numbers increasing at this time. And really going back to that school stability, remembering that is always our most important thing, because our students lose about 3 months of learning every time they have to change schools. And for a good bit of my students right now, we're already at a 5+ change in schools already since September the 8th. That's very difficult for a child to recoup that in a school year, if not impossible. So that's what we're facing right now with housing and the current situation, at least in terms of the school system.
Thanks, Amy. Tina?
Lucky number 3, Elton. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tina Shelvin Bingham. I have a dual role as the Executive Director for the Macomb-Vizay Neighborhood CDC, as well as the Community Development Director for the Lafayette Habitat for Humanities. At Lafayette Habitat for Humanities, we, of course, focus on strengthening communities, stability, self-reliance, and building shelter. But we also build community as well, which is what brought me on to the department, working in neighborhood revitalization to continue to build community across the Acadiana parishes and all of our partner neighborhoods. I, in particular, working with the Macomb-Vizay neighborhood, I represent low-income BIPOC community, a community that was hit hard by just about every disaster that hits our community, not just COVID. But during COVID, we saw a lot of increase in housing concerns and needs across our community. We saw an increase in slumlords or landlords to some, their reactivations in properties that they had no interest in. We had people who were in the process of trying to purchase land or homes from particular landlords, only to find out that those landlords didn't own the property altogether, or those people that they were paying for years had no ownership. We have people, in addition to some of the concerns that were brought up earlier, have issues with folks in our community having access to safe and stable internet. And we here at the Community House, we try to provide a free Wi-Fi service and access to people in our community. But that is a concern that as we continue to shift to a virtual world, that we are still shifting and leaving some folks of our community out of that world as well, by not being able to catch them up to where they are. So we've had a number of issues, increasing need for food access within our community and people getting access to safe and stable food, but then also an increase in mental illness. And I think all of those things can intersect with housing and health. in the community. And that's where we try to kind of land within the Macomb Vise project, is that we focus on health and housing and looking at what holistic health in the community really looks like and how we address those needs for our community. We've really tried to, stay at the forefront and continue to be an advocate for the residents within our community and in the north side of Lafayette, and those people who come to us for those types of resources. So we do see the need in housing, especially after this recent disaster. Macomb Vise, in our neighborhood in particular, and many neighborhoods across Lafayette Parish, we experienced severe wind events that had a lot of older trees that fell onto houses of people who are already limited income or an agent in place. And those are things that we need to make sure we take into consideration, that while these people may be homeowners and may have been able to continue to have home ownership insurance, the deductibles for those insurance policies are extremely high. And many people don't have $3,000 or $4,000 sitting in their account to be able to do the repairs that are needed to make sure that they can stay in a safe and stable and affordable home. So I'll pause there because I feel like we have a lot to talk about and a lot of questions that we have to get through.
Thanks, Tina. Consuela?
Hi, I'm Consuela Gaines, chapter organizer with Voice of the Experience, better known as VOTE here in Lafayette. And we are formerly incarcerated people and currently incarcerated people and families and allies who are constantly working towards improving situations that affect people who are currently and formerly incarcerated. And of course, one of those things that we do face is housing. Oftentimes people come out of prison, and of course, the first thing that a person needs is shelter. And that is something that we definitely try to make sure that people have prior to them coming home. We don't want them to wait until they get home to find it. We try to secure housing for people before they exit prisons or jails. And over the past year, we've noticed that, of course, there's been an increase of people who have problems when it comes to housing. So we're trying to make sure that we keep a close eye on that and stay connected with people who are in positions to kind of make that transition a bit smoother. We try to stay in contact and stay connected with the Office of Probation and Parole, who have put in some programs to help those who are formerly incarcerated and need temporary housing. We definitely try to push for legislation that prevents housing that, where that question is asked, have you been convicted of a felony? That prevents a lot of people from housing. And that is something that we're working towards eliminating on a local, a state, and federal level. Of course, when people have that particular issue that they have to face, eventually it will either create some type of temporary and sometimes long-term homelessness. And of course, we don't believe that someone having a criminal past should be without housing because of that. Everyone needs somewhere to live. Everyone needs shelter. And that is something that we are trying to make sure happens, especially here in Lafayette and the surrounding areas. We don't want to see anyone discriminated against because of criminal past. We want to ensure that formerly incarcerated people rights to housing are top priority, especially when re-entering society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Billy?
Good afternoon. I'm Billy Lacombe with Faith House. Our organization provides safe emergency shelter for survivors of domestic violence, fleeing from abuse, as well as transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and supportive services to go along with it. I think one of our most unique circumstances with the population that we serve is that having a home doesn't necessarily mean that they will be safe. So there are many other supports and resources needed by survivors of abuse to not only escape from their abuser, but to also maintain their level of safety. So we do see situations where we are able to place survivors into a home, but then have to repeatedly move them, which does become a drain on resources and often leaves them, unable to maintain their own housing. During COVID, we have just seen an incredible increase in the numbers of people requesting our services. So you can imagine that being told to stay home, losing your job, your abuser losing their job, would cause situations where there's increased exposure to the abuser and certainly increased abuse happening in the home, as well as the severity of the abuse. Survivors are reporting to us more severe forms of abuse occurring since COVID has taken place than ever before. So the situation has been extremely dangerous, extremely taxing over the past couple of months as we've gone through not only COVID, but then the two hurricanes, which one of them severely damaged one of the larger domestic violence shelters on the western side of the state, therefore reducing even more resources for the individuals that we're serving. I think that over the years, our organization has grown and developed the services that we're providing to meet the individual and unique needs of our constituents by offering a wide array of services. They all come to us. It's not a cookie cutter situation where we can provide the same things to each individual. We have to individually assess their needs, see what their particular abuse issues are, their safety needs, their lethality, risk, what all of those things are as we work to help them to escape and be free from their abuser. What we spend most of our time doing is working on finding housing for them. So that has definitely, over the past few months, we have seen a huge decrease in those resources. So again, as Lee mentioned, that does often result in the potential for survivors to have to return to their abusive partner. There are lots of other complications, of course, when we're working with survivors of abuse. But I would say that our advocates have worked diligently to adjust the way that they're providing the services, adjust the way that we're accessing the existing resources. And I'm curious to see, how those things are occurring in all of the other organizations.
Thanks, Billy. And Elsa?
My name is Elsa Dimitriadis. I'm the Chief Impact Strategist for ARCH, and I just want to kind of start by saying how honestly humbled I am to be a part of this panel today with people who are such incredible leaders and are doing the good, right work. I think that my value to the conversation today comes from sort of a culmination of things that I've done in the community. I want to make sure that we specifically acknowledge the ALICE population and housing and the relationship between the two. ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. It's what we colloquially refer to as the working poor. They live above the federal poverty level, but they still have trouble making ends meet. United Ways across the country do an incredible job tracking this particular population, and I highly recommend spending some time with the report that's published about every 2 years. You can find it on the United Way of Acadiana website. I think what we're seeing more and more this year is an illumination of how many people actually are ALICE. They're working so hard to make ends meet, but they can't quite do it, and how vulnerable they are and have been this particular year. And, something that's so important to note about ALICE is how hard they often work to hide their struggles. And now they simply can't do that any longer. And so you're seeing them in food lines. They're asking for help with utilities and rent, or they're experiencing homelessness. And so it's outside of the perception of what many people have with regard to who is in need. I read this editorial last night about a man and his wife. They're in Texas and they've worked so hard. And over the course of this year, they've had to leave their home. They foreclosed on their home. They're now renting. And this week they had to line up for food in those incredible lines I'm sure most of you have seen in Texas particularly. And just the shock that they themselves were feeling, because they saw themselves as givers, like whatever extra they had ever, they gave to other people. And now they had to sort of reframe that and be a recipient. So I would say the pivoting here in this last year with regard to the ALIS population has come from like the need for perception adjustments, both for the people who are newly in need and for the general public. Thank you.
Thanks, Elsa. And thanks to each one of the panelists that are here today to talk with us. That's the last time I'm going to call on you. So I'll invite you just to kind of jump in as you feel led. But the next thing I'd like to ask of you and hear some information about is what information you or your organization is using, and that could be quantitative or qualitative, to sharpen your assessment, prioritization, or your service delivery model to ensure that we are able to better respond in the future. And maybe the answer is that you haven't been able to pick your head up enough to consider that yet. And so if that's the case, is there a consequence for that? Or is there some information that you think that we're not yet using that could design future responses? What's important or will be important in the decision-making process as we move forward?
I can say for us, as far as the mission, it may be quantitative, but we look at the qualitative data of what's going on out there. Of course, when it comes to our HUD programs, we fall on the arts, so we make sure we follow those guidelines through HUD, through ARCH to see how we bring people into the program. But especially this year, with the numbers, with the way that they are, we're just like everybody else, doing what we can to reduce those numbers, or as they said way back in old April and May, flatten the curve so we can keep everybody housed. I think in the future, it's just going to be a combination of the two. Because you want to stand by your mission, but you want to help as many people as possible.
And I'd like to piggyback off of Alton just a bit. We do similar evaluations through our grant requirements, but one of the unique things that we do is like a forensic review of cases whenever a survivor is murdered in the community, to look at all of the agencies and responses that individual reached out and experienced during the time leading up to the fatality. And we certainly learn a huge, incredible amount of information through that review that we can then inform not only our organization, but the others that were involved as well, on how they can make changes to protocols and practices to better provide an impact to perhaps eliminate those fatalities in the future. So I think that taking that time to look at it does certainly inform us in our work. But I would encourage others to do the same as well. One of the most unique things that we see is that leading up to a fatality, victims often encounter more than 10 community agencies, organizations, or justice system related agencies before they are actually murdered. So they are reaching out, they're trying to get help. Sometimes systems work, sometimes they don't, but there are lessons to be learned by looking at those individual situations.
Yeah, I would also agree that we've been using both qualitative and quantitative data when we looked at how we adjust the way we continue to engage with the community, making sure that everyone stays safe. My battery might die, but making sure everyone stays safe and is healthy.
Blaine, call the front desk.
Sorry, guys. And one of the other things that we did, we have a quality assurance committee. We all in Arch have satisfaction surveys that we do with the clientele. And right now we're about to start the process of a strategic plan that's going to involve the employees, the board members, and the residents and participants of the program to help guide moving forward.
We do a little bit different because we're not a housing agency, but we do a needs assessment with each family as they enter our program to figure out where are they and what exactly are their most immediate needs so that we can refer out and connect with agencies in the community. We keep that needs assessment in each client's file, but I'm also keeping that data so that I can figure out over a year's time where exactly are we needing to plug some things in our own program. Because of that data that we have collected, we were able to identify that we needed to add social workers for mental health to our program. So we hired 2 social workers to add to our homeless program this year. And also looking at the quantitative side, we are looking at student numbers, looking for because I want the best outcomes for my students. So looking at their grades, attendance, and discipline to figure out, are they needing academic support? Are they needing mental health support? Are they needing referral out to community agencies? Do we need to get truancy involved so we can get some support for the family? If it's housing, whatever that's contributing to the grades, attendance, and discipline numbers that we're seeing. So a little bit different, but we are using a mixed methods approach to identify and fulfill those needs.
Great. Well, so maybe you guys could share a little bit with us about what specific policy changes, and that can be local, state, national, that you would think would be of significant benefit to ensure that everyone in Acadiana has access to safe, affordable, stable housing, and that all episodes of homelessness are rare, brief, non-recurring. If there's anything that can be done on an organizational level that could make a difference, or any action steps that you would suggest that the attendees that are here today might take moving forward to amplify the need.
I can start. One thing that I'm really excited about is a small but growing movement to get landlords to report prompt rental payments to major credit reporting agencies. We're in a world now where direct drafts are the norm, and but many of those payments don't do anything to build our credit. So we're going to have to figure out a way to incentivize that for landlords, or create methods by which that lift is lighter. But I'm really excited about that possibility for to open up the opportunities for people for home ownership, and then trying to close that wealth gap. And one other thing I wanted to say is that I think that we can do more to provide education around everything we're talking about here to the general public, because the more tools that they have, the more that they'll become advocates themselves. A little bit off topic, but not so much, is Dr. Rick Swanson at UL created a presentation about the history of civil rights in Lafayette. And so every time he gives that presentation, I see people, in shock. And it's really given me firsthand insight into how education around a topic, even when people are seemingly dug in about it, creates or can create an army of people who are interested in systemic change. So I think that the more that we can have conversations like this, the more that we can not only exchange resources, but also really sort of like look at our collective, big, hairy, audacious goals and utilize a collective impact model, I think that we'll be able to communicate better. I mean, I've learned stuff today already that we can utilize to slowly educate the general public. Thanks.
I'm not a big policy person. I'll leave that up to Claude. But what I think is when these new apartment complexes or new funding are coming into the area, and they're supposed to be low-income housing, I think there needs to be a way that funding is split up so that construction is done, as they would say in old school, is on both sides of town. When an area comes up, and I'm living proof of that, when an area comes up all around and the whole community is brought up, each person in the community is benefits. So I think when funding is decided and when people put in applications for grants or whatnot, they need to be made or told that, hey, we need to make sure we hit the low income and the high income side of town, because what's that thing called? NIMBY, not in my backyard? That needs to go. Because eventually, and as COVID has taught everybody, your backyard become their backyard really quick.
Also, I think there needs to be some very quick legislation towards putting a halt to evictions, especially right now during this pandemic. A lot of people have been placed in some very dire situations where, they're losing their jobs, they're getting less hours at work, and it's very, very difficult for people to keep up with all their bills, especially their housing, which is more than likely the most costly bill that people have. And that's trying to keep a roof over their heads and their family. The last thing they need to be experiencing is an eviction. So I think that Louisiana certainly needs to be looking at some type of legislation where they're putting a halt to evictions. And of course, everyone's situation is different, but at least if they know, or at least try to figure out, or understand what's going on with a person, why they're not able to pay the full amount, they need to definitely visit that, so that can put a stop to homelessness. Too many people are becoming homeless because of that. And I think that, of course, organizations should have that ability to be able to push the needle on that and really try to put that halt to evictions locally.
I'd also add, I'll double down on Elsa's education. I think that it's very important that we continue to educate the people in our community and the self-activated activists within our community by providing them with the right information that they can continue to fight. When we are at home taking a break, we have advocates that can fight for us. Also, I would advocate for better property laws at the state level, specifically around adjudication and blighted properties, because in Lafayette in particular, we have a lot of them on the north side of town. I think that we could be doing a lot better with, but we are often stifled by what the state requires. Also, I think a policy that we should be pushing for on the state and the local level and regionally maybe, but an equitable housing plan for our community. Something that really shows, how people in our community gain access not only to safe, affordable housing, but to better employment and better educational opportunities as well. And I think that's it for my list.
I would love to educate the landlords that we have. This is Carol with Arch. I'm the housing specialist. We don't have enough landlords, and landlords, I think, are the key to placing our at-risk people, our hard to place, forgotten people, evicted people. Educating our landlords right now and the fact that there's money available to them to get their homes occupied is very important. So we will have more spaces to place people. Right now, we don't have that space. It's the inventory right now throughout Lafayette and Acadiana area is so limited that if we let more people know the importance of it, more landlords know the importance of it, it should open up more doors for our clients.
And also, I'll just jump in really quickly in that because I forgot to add it, that landlords, when she said landlords, it reminded me that we don't know, we have landlords. The issue is that we don't know who they are and what properties that they own and how much it costs to rent them. So I think if we had policies or laws in place that would not force, but kind of encourage landlords to list their properties and make them available publicly for people to be able to seek and search for, I think would be helpful as well as far as getting access to more affordable housing.
Yes, I'm reaching out to all kinds of landlords right now. I'm making a list for us.
Thank you, Carol.
And I'd like.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Another thing I would like to add, and thank you, Elsa, for bringing this to my attention because it was on my mind earlier, about us having conversations with people who have had those lived experiences. I'm a firm believer when it comes to certain groups of people, be it homeless or formerly incarcerated, there shouldn't be conversations being had without some of these people at the table who have lived those experiences. So it shouldn't be anything about us without us. And who better can share their experience than someone who has lived it. So I think that these people need to be brought to the table, when it comes to decisions being made about us or about them. And I think that would really kind of like turn the tide and people would have a better understanding about people's situations and how they ended up in those situations to begin with, because we can only assume so much, but to get it actually from the horse's mouth, as they say, is the best way to do that.
Thank you, Consuela. I appreciate you helping us remember to stay centered in the voices of those who have experience around these issues. That's, I think, critical, you're right, to our work ahead. We have tried to pack a lot into a short period of time. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't have time to solve all the issues, certainly in one conversation or even several conversations, but we'll continue to reach for these deeper dives into this. We have a few minutes left, about 7 minutes left till the top of the hour, and I do want to invite anyone who has questions. You can either put them in the chat and a panelist can respond to a question in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a question, feel free to do that as well.
I'm just taking myself off mute. I think it'd be great if we had a legislative package to go to city, parish, and to go to the state. I don't know if we're going to get anywhere with the feds, with Congress or the Senate, but, state government and local government can do a lot. And it would also be educating the public at the same time if we had this package together. There have been so many ideas, moratorium on evictions, all the other ones, the blighted properties, the landlord registry, there's a lot of them, but we need like a unified package that we can all start working on and start talking about.
Yes, thank you.
And I volunteer.
I think that's what we were all waiting to hear.
That's what we like to hear.
Let's see if there's any other questions in the chat. Feel free to unmute if you want to ask something else, but I'm going to look back through the chat. I haven't been able to pay too close of attention to it. Alzina is asking about the status of shelters. Right now, our shelter capacity is extremely limited, and the COVID protocols are requiring many shelters to either operate out of hotels or to not operate at all. We've also lost a number of shelters, which will be permanent losses because of various issues. And so some of our shelter beds won't come back even post-COVID, whatever that means. But certainly as a temporary measure, a number of our shelters have reduced capacity. A huge shout out to the shelters that respond to domestic violence, in that they have maintained and in many cases increased their capacity. And so, but that has taken a huge lift, and one that our emergency shelters for different populations has not been able to necessarily respond to in the same manner. I will mention that there's still 250 households in hotels right now. And so there has been a number of different options for shelter, simply just not enough to meet the increased need.
Lee, I have a question. Okay, so I saw, and probably at least some of the rest of you saw Lee just nailing it on TV, on like KATC News, being interviewed about, they were doing a segment about the people, increased amount of people who are panhandling at intersections. And so I was kind of just wondering, like, once that aired, I mean, I'm just wondering what the response has been. Have you gotten contacts from anybody, or has anything developed from that? I just didn't know what happened since that aired.
I don't know that there's been anything specific, Clancy. We are seeing, I think, more folks attuned to the needs. Recognizing that there is a housing and homelessness crisis within our community. But I don't know that there's been anything specific from that particular piece. But thanks for the compliment there.
Lee, if you would like for me to add.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
One thing, this is Kim with Catholic Charities. A few things I'll touch on. The shelters that we have operated in the past transitioned a few months into COVID, transitioned into hotels, and our congregate shelter buildings are still not operating because of COVID. There are plans moving forward for all of our shelter buildings to be renovated so that we can safely accommodate people back in them. But we have to go through construction, which due to the hurricanes, that's going to, I feel like, take a little bit longer than it normally would, or that we would want it to take, because of the availability of contractors and the processes that we have to go through using federal funds that we have available to do that. So I don't have an immediate date to provide. It is going to take a while. And so for right now, the hotels are serving as our shelter. The second thing on there's some questions about funding made available for rent utility assistance through the city. Specifically, the question was about the business loan program. And yes, there was $100,000 that was pulled back out of that business loan program and put into rental assistance through Catholic Charities. We have spent those dollars. We have provided a significant amount of rental and utility assistance in the last few months. I believe we're right under $370,000 in the last 2 months for about 460 households. We have over 400 households that remain on our list. And so we're actively working to provide rent and utility assistance. As someone mentioned earlier, it's important to prevent as many episodes of homelessness as possible. especially when you have families with children involved, as Amy had discussed, the challenges that become involved whenever a child experiences homelessness. So we do have some funds that have been allocated to us from the city that are remaining in that program. We are continuing to provide assistance, although the number of applications we have on that list probably will exceed the amount of money we have available. The third thing about the panhandling, Arch and Catholic Charities have been asked to continue a conversation by the city council and by the administration about panhandling in Lafayette, whether it's to continue, whether they want to continue to pursue the ordinance about the sidewalk, or otherwise the city, through the administration and some of the council members, have met with Lee and I to continue to express their desire to eliminate panhandling in Lafayette at all costs. And so we have attempted to provide some education about the current crisis that our community is experiencing around housing and homelessness, and why we're seeing an increased number of people unsheltered in Lafayette, and why there's an increased number of people that are panhandling. And I think that community education is incredibly important right now. I think this conversation we're having today is incredibly important. I'm glad it's being recorded, because I think that so many people that I come across in my day-to-day life have no idea how bad it is for so many of our neighbors. And so I think that I would like to share this conversation, once it's available on a recorded format. I would hope that those city council members that would like to continue to pursue measures towards reducing panhandling would take the time to understand this information provided today, include the people that need to be at the table. As was mentioned earlier, nothing about us without us. I think that that's important as well. And so I think Lee's being, she did a great job advocating on the news that day from the perspective of people that are struggling with housing. So that's it for me.
Thanks. And that's a good segue. Kim, we have met our time. Matt with AOC Community Media did put the link for the YouTube video of this event in the chat box, so you can grab it there. And right after this is over this afternoon, you'll receive an email follow-up. It'll have the link in it as well. But it will also include a survey. We would really appreciate your input on what the ways in which you've benefited from Arch and the ways in which you would like to see Arch support the community, and what, so there's a couple of survey questions in there. I would really encourage you to take the time to fill that out. It will help shape 2021, and we'll move forward together and stronger in that manner. I want to thank each and every one of you for your participation today, especially our panelists. Thanks for being willing to be in the spotlight today and to share your experience and your wisdom with us. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I hope to have many more like it. So the rest of you who are on here, watch for your email asking you to help us with that. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you all.
Thank you.